Pocast Booth at Dublin Tech Summit. My name is David Monaghan, and I'm Deputy Editor of Business and Finance magazine, and I'm joined today by Dr. Ben Goertzel, CEO and founder of SingularityNET, and Sandra Healy, CEO and founder of Inclusio. They will be guiding us today through a conversation on AI and DE&I. How can AI enable systems, eliminate biases, and create a more inclusive workplace? Now, Sandra, I'm going to come to you first. As I said, you are the CEO and founder of Inclusio. Inclusio is a science-based, data-led diversity and inclusion platform that combines technology, psychology, and artificial intelligence. This is in order to measure, track, and implement DE&I across an organization. Now, when we think of AI, we think of a system or a machine that demonstrates intelligence, a sort of objective and cold intelligence. A lot of people wouldn't consider that AI could possibly hold the hang-ups and potential bigotry that we humans do. So how can AI perpetuate bias and lead to potential negative outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm delighted to be here today. I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that AI is trained on data, and if there's bias in the data set, well then the decisions that the AI makes and the outputs of the system potentially could be full of bias and stereotypes. I think, some of the things we've seen published recently around people playing around with ChatGPT and some of the other systems out there, we're seeing some of those things, and I think that's the danger of it. If the data set is not testable, transparent, and we make sure that it is does not have any adverse effects on when it's applied to a particular group of people, we really need to make sure that that's the way AI decisions are being made in a bias-free and stereotype-free way.
And so I'm going to come to you next, Ben. So you're considered, I suppose, a thought leader in the realm of artificial intelligence, and you've helped develop considerable research in the field. And unlike a lot of commentators who sort of take a doom and gloom approach, you remain an optimist. In fact, you're on record as saying AI is the greatest hope we have to save humanity from exterminating itself. What do you mean by this?
Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there, and AI itself is a broad umbrella comprising a variety of systems with a variety of levels of capability. So I've spent a bunch of my career working on what I've called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, a term I introduced 15 years ago or so. By that we mean machines that are really their own generally intelligent, at least semi-autonomous agents, like a machine that can leap significantly beyond its training data and experience and improvise to deal with an uncertain world, right? And of course humans do this. We have limitations at doing that, but we do it more than current AI programs do. We're not infinitely general intelligences, like we can't run a maze in 7,000 dimensions very, very quickly, but we deal with stuff like the internet that was not part of our schooling or our DNA, certainly, right? So that sort of AGI poses its own set of ethical risks, and the AI that we have today is not general in the same way that the human mind is. On the other hand, it is general and autonomous in some senses that the AI even 5 years ago wasn't, right? So we're clearly on an interesting path of advancing AI. So when we look at the risks associated with the AI, there's a few different categories. So if you look at general intelligence at the human level, you could then look at AI even further beyond that. What, for example, Nick Bostrom of Oxford University has called superintelligence, right? ASI, artificial superintelligence. And this would be an AI that's way smarter than people, right? In the same sense that we're way smarter than chimpanzees or dogs. And it's not too hard to envision when you have an AI as smart as a smart person, that AI rewrites its own source code to make itself even smarter and creates new hardware to accelerate itself. And then if you have something 5 times as smart as people, well, there's a number of options, right? One is you've got effectively a utopia. If the superintelligence likes us, I mean, it can cure death, cure disease, create abundance, right? If the superintelligence considers us a sort of waste of resources or treats us as we treat most non-human species on the planet, then the prognosis would be less rosy, right? And so there's both of these options.
I think, just to say, I think that's an interesting point, because it's who controls these super intelligent machines, and at the moment,
themselves.
Yeah. But I mean, who puts them to work? Like all of them need to be plugged in, right? So, who puts them to work? Who controls them essentially, and like they can be manipulated for good or not?
I think you need to look at it at different stages. Once you have something that's really much smarter than people, it's unlikely people will control it or control its electrical outlet either. Like its robots will control its electrical outlet and will control the mines and the factories. I mean, just as dogs and chimpanzees have trouble controlling human beings, right? I mean, in some contexts, perhaps they could. A big mighty dog could keep you in the corner, but maybe not for long, because you can use tools and it can't. But so that's one class of issues. But a class of issues that's perhaps easier to think about is in the earlier stages before you get there, right? So suppose you have an AI that's half as smart as people, or a quarter as smart as people, or as smart as people in some ways and not in other ways. And then you have AIs that may have a measure of autonomy, but they're also controlled and manipulated by people. They may be able to do a lot of jobs that people could do, but not all jobs. And they may have their own strange biases, but they may also reflect the biases of the people that trained and taught them. And you can have a quite complex situation.
How can we ensure that AI remains ethical and inclusive, and that these biases are not perpetuated? What are the steps we need to take to ensure that doesn't happen? I
think, like David, when we were building inclusio, we spent 4 years in Dublin City University, and our system and the platform is driven by AI at the core, and we wanted to make sure that we built an ethical AI system. And back in 2018, the only principles that had been published at that point were the Australian government. So they've published the 8 ethical principles around how you would build an ethical AI engine. And they talk about things around no harm. They talk about the data being testable, transparent. What's the data being trained on? And I think being able to challenge that creates, I suppose, more safety for us, even around GDPR and data privacy practices that are there to protect us. We need to make sure that the AI that's out there at the moment, which is not the AGI, it's just AI, I think if we can get some ethical principles and good decision making and transparency around what's there at the moment, I think there potentially could be more trust around the AGI that we're talking about, the super intelligence, right? So we're only at the very beginning really of that journey. So how can we make sure that we build in good decision making and ethical practices now so that there's more transparency and more trust with these super computers or super AI machines?
I'd say there's 3 important aspects to think about, and we've just seen one of them highlighted very well. So there's the data that's fed into the AI in the first place. There's experience, because AIs don't only learn from the data, they learn from data they're gathering through interaction, so they learn from their experience. And then there's sort of the software, the algorithms and representations in the AI. And I mean, they all need attention, right? I mean, with a system like ChatGPT and other large language models, these are heavily sort of data-bound systems, so that they do a lot of amazing stuff, partly because they have a lot of amazing data fed into them, and they don't venture that far from their training data in a way. So if their training data is racist, you have to do a lot of work to make them not be racist, right? Whereas with a human, our history can be racist. We have more capacity to abstract and reflect, and we can go beyond our training data in a way that these current AI systems can't, right? So the data is one point. And then when you have systems that adapt and learn from experience, like some of the robots that my team is building, the Sophia robot, the Grace Eldica robot, the Desdemona music robot that we're building and running on our SingularityNET AI system, these are trained on data, but they're also learning a lot from every interaction. So then you ask, like, well, what am I asking these systems to do, right? If you're having them do positive, compassionate, helping things, that's framing the system's mind in the same way that a data set does. If they're put in a situation where they're manipulating people and trying to, say, sell them stuff they don't need, then their mind is being shaped by those manipulative, dishonest interactions, right? And then the third part is the software itself, right? So we have certain structures and representations in our mind that lets us, do theory of mind, model another person's mind. It lets us be empathic and compassionate. You could try to build those into your software, or you could not bother, right? So, and I think going forward, we need to pay attention to all these things: data, the learning and experience, and the actual software structures and representations inside the AI. And I think that a critical issue is, well, addressing ethics in AI systems is not easy. It's not impossible. It's also not always on the short path to making the most money with an AI system. So if the goal is purely how do I make the most money in the fastest time using AI, this is just a bunch of other stuff to pay attention to that it's not always going to get focused, which is why efforts like inclusio are important, to sort of put some focus on this issue.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think you're making a great point there around the time and the effort that it goes into building an ethical AI, because you have to take your time with it. You have to consider all of those things. It's quite a holistic process. It's not just about the data, it is about the algorithms, it is around the how does the information and the decision, how does the system learn? Like, for example, in inclusio, we have a recommender system, but we don't teach the recommender system. The employees who use it make the recommendations. So that means the system is learning. So we're not coding bias in or making, our assumptions into the platform. It's the employees within their culture and within their contextual environment are making recommendations around what does this culture need. Like, that's a very interesting way to build it, because we could make those assumptions. We could say, we're the experts. This is what we think that cohort or that group of people needs. We don't do that. We allow people to recommend and make decisions around what's required in their context and their culture. And then that means it gets smarter and can help shift the culture in their own context. That takes time, it takes effort, it takes a focus on ethics, and I think empathy for humans to do that.
And we need that to happen globally going forward, right? So to have a bunch of very well-meaning people in Silicon Valley figure out, how to slant the mind of the AI that's providing services in Africa is not going to be as good as taking the sort of approach you described, where the Africans themselves are interacting with the AI and shaping the mind, so to speak, or at least the response and knowledge patterns of the AI that they're interacting with. And building just the tooling and the framework for this takes work. It's work that is doable, but it's work that not every company is incented to do.
Yeah.
Well, how can we ensure everyone gets on the same page in terms of regulation?
You're a really funny guy.
Yeah.
I'm a part-time comedian.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting question, because if I look at, only 2018 wasn't that far long ago, right? And we had to look at Australian principles to guide us. And I know now Ireland, in fairness, is leading out from an EU perspective around developing ethical principles. I think GDPR and data privacy regulation is a good starting point, right? Even if we can, adhere to that while we're building our tools and systems. But it's going to be very, very difficult to regulate, because I think it is going to take, hearts and minds as well as policy and practice, as I describe when we think about diversity, equity and inclusion. It's going to be very difficult to regulate. I think we need to be having conversations like this and more awareness around the importance of building ethical systems.
I see more hope in sort of voluntary standards coming out of the AI research and commercial community than government. Government will regulate AI to some extent. It has to, but I think the pace at which government can act tends to be quite slow compared to the advance that we're seeing with AI technology. Not that industry standards organizations are that fast either, but it can perhaps be better than international agreement among governments. So I think we're gonna see industry voluntarily adopt standards just for their own good to avoid huge mess unfolding, right?
And I think we need to ensure that humanities are in as part of that conversation. And I think if I think about with inclusio, we describe what we've built is behavioral data science, bringing in the psychology and the human perspective into data and designing the algorithms. So I think we need to make sure that we have that balanced view and the balanced perspective when we start to work out these principles. And no doubt I agree, I think a lot of it's going to have to be voluntary and industry-led, I would say, and that's where we're going to get that critical mass of adoption and tech for good.
Absolutely. No AI is born biased, I suppose it's fair to say. Actually, where are we in terms of EU law with AI, Sandra? Do you know anything about that?
I don't think anything has been set in stone yet. I do know there's a lot of work being going on, particularly in Ireland. There's been forums over the last 2 to 3 years of Ireland wanting to lead out on setting some standards. But I haven't seen anything being published yet to say, yes, these are our set of standards, but I don't think we're too far away from that.
Okay.
I think you just said no AI is born biased, but it's not true. I mean, if you train an AI on Reddit or on the internet, it is born very biased, and that's much of the issue that we're seeing here, right? Because its parents, which is the internet, are biased, so the AI is born biased, right? That's part of the trouble that we're seeing is the easiest, quickest way to do things with current technology is just throw something together where its mind is like whatever you downloaded, right? And I mean, imagine if you had a human child and you trained them on Reddit as their knowledge of the world, right? I mean, this is not what we do as parents of our children, right? But it's what's being done as parents of large language models and AI systems, right?
But even within the different cultures around the world, there's bias. That's how we make decisions. We learn as we grow in our communities and in our environments where culturally there can be cultural bias within that and how we think that people should behave and think and act in the world. But thankfully as we get older, and in particular when we go into workplaces, we learn that this is how things, how to be more tolerant, more respectful, and to understand people who are different from ourselves. That's what we need to think about when we think about AI.
The same sort of dialectic is there with raising human children. Like often you find your kids reflecting how you are rather than how you would like to be, right? And we're sort of seeing this with the AI now also. But a human child has the ability to reflect on themselves and to shape their own approach to the world. Current AI systems don't have that, right? So I think in some ways the dynamic will shift as we gradually move toward AGI, because now we're dealing with systems where really they have the biases that we bake into them, even whether we bake them in knowingly or just stupidly and unthinkingly. As we make systems with more reflective capability and a little more autonomy, they will be able to reflect on their own biases, and this can be good and bad, right? I mean, it can mean they can get rid of some nasty stuff we baked into them that we didn't even realize, right? Just as a human can grow beyond the biases of their parents, it could also mean they self-organize some ways of thinking we don't like, right? And so I think see and visibility into how the AI is thinking and why it's thinking what it's thinking is going to be important too. And I think toward that end, the rise of powerful open source AI systems is quite beneficial, because like GPT-4 is a very powerful system. It's exciting. On the other hand, it's, in spite of being made by a company called OpenAI, it is closed, right? And you can't see, you don't know what's inside, you don't know what data was used to train it, you don't know what algorithms are in there. If it starts doing something that you don't like, you don't know why, which means you don't know how to help fix it. OpenAI can try to fix it, but that's a small group of people. So we're seeing more and more open source AI projects pop up. I mean, I've had one called OpenCog for a long time, but you're seeing a bunch of open source LLMs popping up, right? And I think this is quite Well, if you have something that's open, if it's controlled in this sort of democratic and participatory way, then there's more ability, both now and as we progress toward AGI, like there's more ability to inspect and see what's going on and why, and then participate in shaping it. Because in some ways, an AI is better than a human in that way, because I can't look in my brain and see, like, why do I have that stupid response I have? But an AI, I mean, you can look in the RAM of the computer, you can look at the code, and in theory, you can see exactly what's going on. It takes some work. On the other hand, if it's all sitting in some proprietary code base and the company that made it doesn't care to look into why it made that response, then it doesn't matter that you have that theoretical capability.
I'm just conscious we are coming up to our time, but before we go, so what would you say to help assuage people's concerns about AI? How can we temper the sort of alarm? Right to be a little bit afraid. What do we think?
Look, from my perspective, I think that we need to focus on some kind of transparency. I don't think governance is the right word, but I do think we need to think about how we can have more shape and transparency around how the large language models that are currently out there at the moment, how can we ensure that they are free from bias and do no harm from a human perspective. So I think testable, being transparent and having some guidelines around that, I think is going to be really, really important. And I certainly think that when we start to move into the super intelligence and we start to move into the AGI, and I think if we can get things right now and build confidence and trust in, I think I was reading about Dr. Emily Bender. She describes the large language models that are out there at the moment as manipulation of linguistic. They don't really understand what you're asking. They don't really understand the output. They're just very cleverly bringing you back pattern matching to the point that you think you're having a conversation and you're not. We are having a conversation. So I think we need to attend to it now, build confidence and trust in that. And I hope, fingers crossed, that when we get to AGI and the super intelligent computers, that they're put to good in the world.
I would say, from a rational standpoint, if we ask what's going to happen when we have machines that are really much more generally intelligent than us, we'd have to say, like, the confidence interval is fairly wide, right? I mean, you can't really pin down with a high level of precision what's going to happen. That doesn't mean we should be doomsayers and say, like, we're all going to die because a Hollywood movie said so. There's no reason to be confident of that, but there's also not a great rational reason to say it's absolutely all going to be good and everything will be for the best in this best of all possible worlds, right? I mean, it's a juncture of significant uncertainty. I mean, it seems sensible that we can influence the outcome. Like, if the first AGIs are killer robots, it's probably worse than if the first AGIs are being helpful to people, right? So, I mean, we can, in the local sense, we can do something by helping the AIs that exist right now to be more beneficial, and it seems like that biases things in our favor. But you can do that while acknowledging there is some fairly broad uncertainty in the overall future. And so if people's psychology is not comfortable with that, and there are people who want a great amount of certainty about the future, they're going to be worried people, right?
Well, yeah, we are indeed in the infancy, I suppose, of this revolution. But that's, I'm afraid, I wish I could keep talking, but that's all I'm afraid we have time for. So I'd like to thank my panelists, my guests today, Dr. Ben Goertzel and Sandra Healy, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Dr. Ben Goertzel and Sandra Healy are both speaking at Dublin Tech Summit, so keep an eye on the website for that. In the meantime, it is goodbye for now, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.